Alright, welcome to another episode of Iokua Hates Everything. This is the second in a three-part retrospective on the 3D Castlevanias. Now, last time around, I covered Legacy of Darkness and Castlevania 64 for, as the names would imply, the N64. Now, I basically said, alright, what these games lack, they make up for in balance. By which I mean they had a strong balance of the platforming, the fighting, and the puzzle solving. And that worked for them. They weren't great games by any stretch, but they tried to get multiple aspects of the classic series in. The same cannot be said for Lament of Innocence for the PlayStation 2 and Curse of Darkness for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Now, we were just looking at Lament of Innocence, and that was the core of the gameplay, fighting. We're now looking at Curse of Darkness, and again, this is the core of the gameplay, fighting. You look at this, and at least I think to myself and say, where's the creativity? Where is the Mario 64 of the Castlevania series? Where is the Ocarina of Time of the Castlevania series? You don't get that in this. You get more of a, hey, something's missing. Imagine spaghetti and meatballs. And everyone loves spaghetti and meatballs. Well, let's pretend everyone does. Now, imagine if you were in a fine dining restaurant and you ordered spaghetti and meatballs, but the chef told you, oh no, we don't make that. We make my own special spaghetti. I assure you, I make it for you. You are gonna love it. And when it gets to your plate, it's noodles, no sauce, no meatballs, just the noodles. That is Castlevania Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness in a nutshell. When you strip the Castlevania series down to its most basic elements, it has two very important elements. Two: platforming and combat. Slaying demons, fighting Dracula, fighting big, giant, scary bosses. All the while making tough jumps and climbing your way through Dracula's castle. Both games are severely lacking in that department. So much so that it almost feels like the teams had a meeting and said, hey boss, what do you want? We can't figure this out. We can't get the platforming to work. Nothing we do works. We can't figure out how Nintendo did it when they made Mario 64. So, we were thinking, you guys want to just kind of, leave out the platforming? And the boss was like, yeah, whatever. I don't care so long as I get my effeminate man, women, and girly-looking Dracula. It's all that matters to me. You guys do whatever the hell you want so long as I get effeminate Belmonts. And that was that. Yeah, you've got sub-weapons. Yeah, you've got magic. Yeah, you've got whips and swords, and in the case of Curse of Darkness, weapon fusion and all that stuff, and armor and equipment and familiars and abilities. But what you don't have is one of the core elements of the gameplay. It just leaves it right the fuck out. It's just not there. They don't really explain why there's no platforming. They don't even really approach it. There's some platforming, but it's not worth experiencing. It's like playing as a brain-damaged chimpanzee with a hangover and two broken legs and no tail. Like your tail has been torn off and you're beating your enemies to death with it while using it to platform. Like, you take a look at the God of War series, and there would be no God of War without Castlevania. And they should have bit that. They should have said to themselves, hey, it does what we're trying to do really well, so let's just, gnaw on that and roll with those. Let's take what they did and put our spin on it. I'm not going to say rip it off. Let's build on that, but they don't at all. Instead, what we get is mediocre combat and god-awful platforming. This is the platforming in Lament of Innocence. There's virtually none in Curse of Darkness. There is some, but it's not really worth writing home about. Like, this is it. It's clumsy jumping that barely works. And, like, whipping to get onto platforms and to grab onto ledges and that kind of stuff. And it doesn't work. It barely functions, and when it all comes down to it, it doesn't feel like the platforming we played and loved back in the 80s and the 90s on the Genesis and the NES and the Super Nintendo. It's just where Symphony of the Night revolutionized the 2D games by borrowing from the Metroid series and all that good stuff. The 3D Castlevanias should have borrowed from games like God of War and Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, but they don't. I mean, Lament of Innocence, again, has an excuse because it came out before God of War. Curse of Darkness did not. If you take a look at what they're doing with Lords of Shadows, they're doing what I'm suggesting. They're taking platforming and the God of War style combat and puzzle solving and, you know, the whole epic Castlevania feel, and they're cramming it together. They're doing what they should have done 6 years ago. And when it all comes down to it, what we have to take away from Lament of Innocence is that there is more to any one game than one core aspect. There will always be more. There's more to Castlevania, there's more to Lament of Innocence, but Lament of Innocence focuses on one so heavily, so severely, that you can't really enjoy the extra. Same with Curse of Darkness. These games don't have balance. Alright, so within the next week, I should have a review of Nier out.
What just happened?
And after that, I'll cover Lords of Shadows and probably the last of my little series here. Just, you know, for all 7 people who watch these videos.
Who's there?
Take her easy.
Don't get so excited. I'm just an old man.